everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have Ted Cohn with me, and it's so great to have him on the show. He's got quite a history. He's hung out with Steve Jobs in the 80s when he created the Next computer. And I'm really looking forward to finding a little bit more about Steve on a personal rather than just the persona that the media projected him as. So I'll tell you a little bit about Ted. He's a founder and CEO of WildEye, which is and been a tech executive and a history of innovation with 10 patents under his belt. That's pretty cool, Ted. And he's created WildEye, which is a marketplace called Bid to Talk that lets people bid or pay for one-on-one video calls with influencers, athletes, professionals, or anyone. So we're going to dive a little bit into that as well. And it's a technology to handle search, bidding, scheduling, payment processing, security, and video calls. Ted has, over the last 3 decades, established a remarkable career in the software development area, consulting and entrepreneurship niche. Some quick fun highlights about Ted. In 2009, Ted became the first hire at Barnes & Noble to develop the Nook. Very cool. And he was a co-founder at Ugobi. I don't know if I said that correctly, but Ted worked alongside Bob Christopher and Caleb Chung, who developed Furby in raising $26 million to create PO, a life-like dinosaur robot. And who doesn't like a little bit of science fiction that becomes real? So before the days of Google, he established himself as a modern tech giant. Ted helped development of paid search and technology at web crawler Excite. And this is the one that I'm really looking forward to. Is he had the honor of working for Steve Jobs on a number of Next projects, and he's got quite a few anecdotes about Steve that I'm looking forward to. So welcome to the show, Ted. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you very much, Jeff. It's really great to be here.
Now, Ted's talking to us from a beautiful state where there's only 1 million people and a lot of open land. It's called Montana. So he's been there, I think, for Thanksgiving, and thanks for making the time with family. And part of Montana is Yellowstone, and we know that's a series at the moment, which I would recommend anyone, by the way. It's pretty cool. But Ted, let's go back to what got you into the whole tech business. And you mentioned about some of your reading habits as a teenager, and let's go back to the future on that.
Okay. Wow. It's really far back for me. Yeah. So I was born in the 60s. I grew up in the 70s. I remember going to a local liquor store with my dad every week or so to, he would buy whatever he would buy. And I would look at the magazine rack, and on the magazine rack at the time were magazines like Popular Science, Popular Mechanics. And it was this was like 1975. And I remember reading some of these, just blew my mind. I was a 12, 10, 12, 11, 12-year-old. And it was so exciting for people in that era. It blew everything away in terms of technology. Like, wow, here's a computer that you actually purchase, and afford, and not a mainframe. And so that just launched me into my entire career. I was so enamored with the Apple II at the time that came out. In fact, I was a little kid, and I would actually hang out at a local computer store in the Bay Area. I was in El Cerrito, in fact, a little town in the East Bay, and met some friends, and we would get to play with the Apple II for free. The staff was incredibly nice to us to let us, just play with their, very expensive personal computers, but it was an incredible experience, and it really launched us to do great things, I think. Back then we had this in San Francisco Bay Area, there was something called the West Coast Computer Fair. Some of your older guests will probably know about it, but it was like the early convention. And this is where people would create all sorts of new, amazing, low-cost personal computers, and you'd see single board computers. In fact, I remember going there, with my friends to see the early Apple II booth, with Steve and Steve. And it was really nothing. It was a cardboard, it was a table with an Apple I. And, we didn't know anything about the time, we didn't know, nobody knew who these guys were. But we could tell the next year we came and it turned into the Apple II. And that's when everyone's, eyes lit up. So At that point, I had to have one. You know, I couldn't afford it. I asked my parents, and they said, "Well, nope, it's a little too expensive, so you'll have to figure out how to do it on your own and afford it." And so I did. And so at the time, you know, I think the fully loaded Apple II was $1,500 to 2,000, but in today's dollars, it's more like, you know, like 10,000. I mean, it was a very expensive machine, and I didn't realize the value of money at that point in my life. And so, anyway, I can go on forever, but I was fortunate working at this computer store locally to have met a few local business folks who needed software development. So I got a job writing software. I think it was Pascal mostly at the time, to earn money, and I bought my own Apple II, and that just started me off.
So, so you got to meet Steve at the booth. Is that what you're saying back then? Was he there?
He was there. I remember seeing them. I don't think we went up to the booth and actually shook his hand, or, I mean, he wasn't famous at the time.
No,
right?
he wasn't. No, he was a nobody back then.
He was a nobody, exactly. And we were nobodies. We were just enthusiasts, and it was just great. You know, of course, I remember that quite vividly, but no, we didn't go up and shake his hand or, you know, get to meet him at the time, but we did a little bit later. So when, as kids, my friends and I, we bought our own Apple IIs. I had maybe 3 or 4 friends my age who did the same thing. And we ended up developing some fonts, designing fonts at the time, which was kind of fun, where these were called 8-bit or 16-bit fonts on the Apple. And we actually developed some code, some software to help you design the fonts. Well, it turns out we actually designed full set of fonts for the Apple II, which hadn't been created yet. And so one of the people who brought us into Apple, his name is Andy Hertzfeld. He's one of the early Mac people. He worked at Apple at the time. He says, "Hey, Ted and Lawrence and Billy and David, these are my friends, you guys need to sell us your fonts. We really need them. The community needs them." So he had us come down one day to Apple offices in Cupertino, to the headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the moms drove us down, and so he brought us into Bandley. It was Bandley Drive, a famous street where Apple started. And we came in and we saw Steve running around. You know, it was like, and so it's like, wow, there's Steve. You know, because at that point he was famous. And so Andy, we paid us, instead of in cash, he actually paid us in a disk drive. So we each got this glorious disk drive, which at the time is very expensive. So we didn't have to pay taxes on that, thank God. But you know, but it was great to actually see Steve Jobs running around. And I think it was pre-Mac. It was kind of early 80s where they were developing the Mac. I can't say whether I actually got to meet him. I think Andy actually had the gumption to say, "Hey, Steve, come and meet these guys. They're selling us fonts," or something like that. And he may have come over, but it's a little fuzzy for me at that point. But it was just a thrill to be in Apple at the time. And we were like 13, 14 years old. So it's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I think Steve he never finished his degree, did he? But I think he studied calligraphy or something like that, I think, at university before he struck out.
Right.
Yeah. So
right.
Obviously fonts were a very much a big interest, and the whole visual thing and how it presents to the world. And we're even seeing that today in the design of, you know, the Macs and the phones. So let's push forward a little bit further. So you're a teenager, you've met Steve, bought a Mac, got into it, and even did some coding. So then you went on to university, and where'd you go?
Yeah, I went to Cal Berkeley in the East Bay. I had a major in computer science. It was more of a rigorous, approach to learning computer science. We had been kind of hackers, I guess, if you will, developing an assembly language and other languages, Pascal, BASIC, and so forth. It was a really good, rigorous, experience for me to go to college. But I was anxious to get into the computer industry at the time. It was still, becoming more vibrant every day. My parents wanted me to become get a PhD. And I pushed back. I said, no, I'm not ready. I need to jump into the industry.
Yep.
So that's where I did. I jumped into a company called Radius at the time. And these were founded by ex-Mac people. So these were like Andy Hertzfeld, Mike Boych, some others, well-known people, Lon Rossman, I think another from, was it Ed Catmull? Is that, no, that's Pixar. Anyway, well-known people. And at one point I want to say that we learned about Next. So a couple of years later, I graduated in 87. And I think Next announced the Next machine, I think in 1988. And I, again, fixated on, oh my God, I want to work there because not only Steve, but really just the amazing things they're doing. Just the operating system looked exciting. It was a really exciting time. And I knew Andy Hertzfeld, a colleague friend of mine from earlier Apple II days. So, like 10 years had gone by. So I gave him a ring and I said, hey, is Next hiring? I would love to work there. So he pulled some strings and he got me an interview in the graphics group there. And I was lucky enough to get hired. And so I started, I think in 89, it was like the end of the year or something like that, or end of 88. I'm forgetting, it was so long ago. But really had a great time. Next was just an incredible part of my career. I mean, I could go on forever about it, but it was kind of like a renaissance. It was just filled with smart people. It was a once in a lifetime experience for me. And it wasn't just all about Steve. I mean, these were the creme de la creme of Silicon Valley. It was kind of humbling to go there and, be part of this team. But I certainly do have stories I'd love to share with you and your listeners. From my perspective, anyway, I joined the graphics group where I actually developed multi-monitor desktop so that you could drag windows from various screens. So it was really early, and we were using Display PostScript at the time, which was pretty unusual, but a lot of fun. We did a lot of interesting work with what's called graphic compositing effects, and also real-time video, which was new and exciting at the time, be able to import video and export video. I'll just jump into some stories because I think that's really a fun part.
Let's hear a bit more about Steve. I'm intrigued because I suppose I have a bit of a entrepreneurial man crush on Steve. And also the other interesting, useless information is that Steve Jobs' birthday is the 24th of February, which is the same as mine. So
oh my God, that's exciting.
So and also I read one of his biographies written, which I carded, was one of the hardcover books written by one of the top writers. And I think I dragged around Italy with me about 8 or 9 years ago. And so I sort of read a fair bit about Steve. So I'd love to hear more about it.
Sure.
And you mentioned that the public persona versus the private persona is quite different. And tell us some stories. I'm intrigued.
Sure. Yeah, I can't say that I have a lock on all of his stories, but from my perspective, some really interesting ones. The first time I joined was just you get the orientation, and you really get a sort of a initial sort of brain dump from Steve. And I'll never forget just being part of a group of maybe 3 or 4 people that got to sit down on the couch and just hear Steve pontificate and welcome us to the team and individually addressing us and asking us questions. That was just my initial real connection with Steve at that point, was an employee, but I'll never forget, we worked in an office in a location near Xerox Park at the time in Palo Alto. It was an office on, I think it was called Deer Creek. And this is before they moved eventually to Seaport in Boulevard in Redwood City. I worked at an office of like 3 or 4 people on the graphics team. So it was a pretty crowded little, startup. But next door in an office next to me was my friend Keith Olfs, who was the designer of the Next user interface. Mm-hmm. Just a brilliant designer. And, a lot of his work has transitioned into the Mac and certainly into the iPhone since that time. But he's an amazing person. He was every day. I would see Steve, trouncing past our office door to meet with Keith, who was developing the interface for Next, and I would hear just constant yelling. Steve would constantly yell at Keith, calling him names and just things I can't repeat on air here. And it was uncomfortable to listen to. And so when Steve left, I went over to my friend's office to say, hey, first of all, why is he yelling at you? Why is he calling you names? And why are you putting up with this shit? So,
that's right.
And Keith is, he's probably fairly, well, anyway, he said, I just let it roll off my shoulder. He said, literally, Steve's passionate about the UI. I'm making it happen for him. So Steve really loves what I'm doing. I just let it go. He needs to get it out of his system. But it just happened again and again and again. And I just am amazed to this day that he could put up with that kind of, abuse, really. Keith is famous for the beach ball cursor on the Mac. So you'll see it, if you're waiting for something to happen. He invented that, among other things. He's just the kindest soul. And the really sad thing is Keith died a few years ago at 52. It's just really a shame. He had so many friends. He was an amazing guy, very creative. He created something called PixelSite, which is a web-based animation editor. It was really amazing. So another story was once we moved to the new offices in Redwood City, we each had our own office with a beautiful view. It was just an incredible experience to have that opportunity as well. But in a new building, problems can occur. It was a two-story engineering building, really beautifully outfitted. In fact, Steve was very proud of the fact that the building had these floating staircases. I think it was designed by some Italian architect. But one of the crazy things that happened early on was, for some reason, one day we found out that we couldn't go to the bathroom. The bathrooms were blocked. And we're like, what's going on here? We need to, take a pee. And we found out that Steve was in the bathroom yelling at the contractors who, because the tile color was wrong. So I'm like, okay, but it was like a different shade of gray, So, it was like very strange. Steve was very, very detail oriented, when it came to visual matters. And he basically closed down the men's bathroom for 2-3 weeks while the contractors refitted it. So we had to walk all the way into the other building when we had to go to the bathroom. So, another experience I had was he would take us to company retreats, and it was a special time. He took us one year to a location in Santa Cruz, at a place called Chaminade. It's a very nice, luxurious place to have a conference. And I'll never forget, though, this was back in the days when they had just released the Cube, and they're getting feedback because they were going to starting to work on the next product, which is the pizza box that they called it, the flat, color machine, which is the next stage, which I was, lucky to work on. But I remember everyone was sitting around on couches instead of, conference tables in a big auditorium. And it was a free-for-all. I mean, Steve was very humble, and he asked, questions, but people would literally insult him and throw tomatoes. And I mean, it was, it was just a lot of fun. And Steve was just listening, like, oh my God, what this drive does suck. What do we do about it? He was very interactive and very humble, I think, at the time, which is, I think, unusual. People say he's a dictator but he really listens to his staff. And I think one thing that really impressed me was that while he treated marketing folks with disdain, he really just, what's the right word? He adored engineers, because engineers made it happen for him. and he was not an engineer. And I think it carried over from Steve Wozniak, who made it happen for Apple too. So he would bring people through the office, you know, notable people like personalities. One day he brought Ross Perot into my office, Jeff,
Right.
and it was
Okay. Yep.
pretty crazy. You know who he ran for president in '92.
Yep.
And he's a little bit of a kooky guy. He didn't win, but wealthy, very wealthy guy. He invested in Next. But Steve just pops in and brings Ross Perot. I'm just working there. And suddenly Ross Perot's in my office and says, "Hey, Ted, I'd like you to introduce Ross Perot." It was so surreal, Jeff. I mean, it was, you know, and exciting. And he'd bring other people in too. I mean, he brought his wife in one day to meet the team. So I think her name was Lauren or something, and other people. So it was a fun experience.
You must be so, I suppose, grateful and that you were able to have that experience.
I was grateful. And, you know, what's interesting is sort of connects me to what I'm doing now is where I'm really interested in helping people have meaningful, kind of life-changing conversations. And I never became a really good friend of Steve's, although we talked occasionally. One day he learned that I was looking to leave. And I had been there about 3 years. And I kind of felt that I had done a lot there. I've learned a lot, but it was starting to stagnate. And other people had noticed it too. And I had gotten this fantastic offer somewhere else in the Valley. And I decided to kind of take it. And he got wind of this pretty quickly. And he invited me to his office. And you can imagine I had this big gulp in my throat. You know, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? He's going to curse me out. You know, is he going to yell at me? Like, Keith, he was the nicest guy. He says, "Ted," he was just telling me, "Ted, you've got to stay. You're doing great work. You can't leave." You know, he was just imploring me. And it was an interesting conversation because at that point, you know, he had been my idol since I was a kid, you know, and here I was working for him and realizing that Next may not be the be all end all for me. That for me, I had realized Steve's reality distortion field just didn't work that day. And in retrospect, maybe I should have stayed because eventually he took the team to Apple and they all became very wealthy. But for me, it just, at the time, this was a 91, I think I left, or 92. And there were so many other things I wanted to do. And I got basically a 2x salary increase instantly from somewhere else.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, how can you turn that down? So I said, Steve, I put it to Steve. Like, I just said, what do I have to lose? Steve, can you match the offer? You know, it's not that big. I'm sure you can afford it. He said, like, oh, we can't do it, Ted. You know, I can give you maybe $1,000 more. I was making $26,000, maybe 37. I'm not sure, but it was so low. So, you know, I thanked Steve and we had a little more talk, but ultimately I left. And that was sort of my conversation that kind of changed my career. Really. I was privileged to meet him and work with him and help him. But for some reason I decided at that point that, I needed to move on, and I had the courage to do it. It was a little strange.
So we get to that point now. I was realizing that there's more to what you need to do to grow. I think that's maybe what it sounds like you were at that point.
Right.
Yeah. Now, the other interesting thing about, correct me if I'm wrong, but so the Next technology became a lot of the tech that was used to drive technology in the film industry, wasn't it? So Pixar rose out of Next. Is that correct?
I think it did.
Yeah. And some of the tech we see a lot of the tech we saw from the Next got rolled into Pixar and visual effects. So Steve, the effects of that, I think, are pretty profound as well, that we see today in the movies.
Right.
So let's go maybe a little bit further forward now. You've moved on, and you got 10 patents. Tell a little bit about the patents, and then I'd like to have more of a chat about where you currently are with Wildeye and Bid to Talk in the influencer space and social media. I think that would be an interesting chat.
Sure. Oh, the patents really, for me, just are a fortunate experience to develop new technology and new products. And there are many people who create patents. I was just lucky enough to be part of it. I think at Next, I contributed to several, especially around the graphic system. Let's see, at Barnes and Noble, I remember we created a number of patents around reading technology, which was a lot of fun, really interesting work. So I have some experience with writing patents, but by and large, it's developing the technology behind them that's gotten me, kept my interest and drives me forward, is the technology.
So I was having a chat with an Israeli entrepreneur, and he said he loves creating technology that he can then put it into the world and see if it works and the reactions he gets from it. Is that the same sort of passionate purpose and joy that you get from creating technology as well?
Yeah, for sure. I have to say so. I love consumer technology because I really enjoy seeing people's reaction to new products. I guess I like it. It sounds dopey but it's about the magic that computer technology can really bring. Seeing people's awe and wonder when the iPhone came out. Not that I didn't unfortunately contribute to that, but that's the kind of experience I think most tech entrepreneurs kind of hope for. I mean, those are the kind of moments of technology innovation that's so exciting. Something that's interesting, I want to bring up too, and I wish I had been Mark Zuckerberg earlier. At Next, I created this application called Who's Who, which is an internal app where it's very much like Facebook, and you could find everything about an employee, like, oh my God, I saw her over there. Who is she? I can't believe I didn't come up with Facebook. But anyway, I've always had this interest in socializing, and I'm really an introvert. So it's, I really like people, but I get, introverts, they lose energy sometimes when they talk with people a lot or many people in a party. But I really enjoyed it. And anyway, it was just an interesting side note.
Well, I suppose I detected that there's a little bit of introvert about you when I sort of said, we're going to have a fireside chat, and you're going, and you wrote in the email, gulp, and then you're going, I haven't done many chats or interviews for the last few years. And I went, okay, so give me a few questions. So I sent over a few, and
yeah, appreciate that.
So, and that's absolutely fine. I think, Brené Brown's book about, being vulnerable, I think I certainly learned a lot from her TED talk as well as the book, and the power of vulnerability. And guess what? 50% of the planet are introverts, and I think it's really important to understand. And I don't know what I'd call myself. I think I flip between being slightly extroverted to being slightly introverted, but it's the power of vulnerability and the power of quiet, I think, that's really gets stuff done. And so you're creating tech, and let's fast forward to where you are today, and the whole influencer scene. And I believe you and your wife had an aha moment regarding creating a product and you're using a website called wildeye.com, and then part of that tech is Bid to Talk. So tell me a little bit about the inspiration of this Bid to Talk tech and how it all started.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. For me, it started with just the desire to create a new company. I tend to go in and out of consulting or a full-time employment situation to startups. I've started companies before, and I had just come off the COVID had arrived, and I had been laid off, strangely enough, from a very wealthy company called Anthem Inc., which is a big healthcare company. Mm-hmm. My whole team, most of my team was laid off, which is surprising. And that just gave me the impetus to say, okay, I'm ready to jump in again into a new startup. And before that, I had been really interested in human connection maybe partially because of my introvertedness. But also my realization that this whole new situation is isolating people, and people need to connect. we have this deep-seated need for
Mm,
social connection. It's important for survival and for thriving.
mm,
And so, we've seen a lot of deprivation with this situation this year. And so it kicked me into action. I was interested in, it occurred to me that actually Zoom would be a really interesting platform to create a search engine where people could actually find each other. And this resonated with my wife, but also many other friends and colleagues. Got very excited about that, because with Zoom, you have to be invited to to a session. But after some time, early this summer, it occurred to me, and a friend of mine mentioned, it didn't really have a very good business model. It was confusing. It was a little kind of haphazard. And so part of, I think, being an effective entrepreneur is to continue to hone your idea until it's really ready to sprout. And at that point, like early July this year, it occurred to us that bidding was a really interesting idea. That the idea that people's time is precious,
mhm,
is important. We're bombarded, right, constantly, with ads and media and spam, and it just goes on and on and on. And it occurred to me that the influencer space is huge. That it's half the planet is using social media. And my wife, Diane, she was a budding influencer herself. She now has over 7,000 subscribers, many hundreds of thousands of views, and she really likes the space. She has a marketing background and a marketing interest. So we kind of talked this over and pooled our interest and decided this would be a really exciting space to get into. The idea essentially is to give influencers the ability to monetize their fan base in a new way, so that they can actually connect with their fans one-on-one, to have conversations about anything that they want to talk about, but more likely about the subject matter of the given influencer. And in the spectrum, as ranges pretty dramatically from entertainers to subject matter experts. So there's really this amazing spectrum of talent and expertise. And so I think we've struck a chord. There are a lot of people really interested in this. We're thinking that a lot of the people that we're going to be using this platform are probably somewhere in the middle, or probably on the low end, people who are building their careers on social media. And we're finding that they're really interested to earn an income, earn money talking to people.
yep.
There are some influencers that we spoke to who were saying, I'm invited to all of these Zoom calls to participate, but it's a waste of time. I'm sitting there with 100 people and I'm not earning any income. I'd rather have my own channel, own way to make an income.
Mm,
So it's very interesting. We discovered that they do live streams, but it's one way, right?
mhm,
Or they're on Zoom calls that they aren't paid for. So it's really interesting to see the reaction. Another influencer told us he is an entertainer of 8-year-old girls, which is odd to me, but he
okay.
he makes a living, I guess, doing this. He said he would love, for example, to be able to have these rapid sessions where he could talk to these fans for 2-minute segments or 5-minute segments rapidly,
Mhm.
to earn income. So that's sort of the origination of this, but also we're getting some interesting and good validation. It's really exciting.
So you mentioned, because one of the things that I suppose entrepreneurs have to discover when they're creating a new product is what's the big problem or the problems they're solving. And I think you mentioned one, which was the amount of time it takes for an influencer, or finding an influencer, I think were two of the things. So is there a big problem that you're trying to solve, or is it a range of problems you think you're solving? Um,
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think,
because I'm going to raise another interesting thing. So as the guy for Uber for lawn care launched a product, and he thought that he was launched it, and the big problem he was solving was making it cheaper for people to mow the lawns. He realized that he'd got that problem people didn't care. They just wanted convenience. They wanted to not waste time trying to get people to mow their lawns.
Oh, I
So,
see.
so yeah, I'll be intrigued on what you see as the problems you're solving with the platform.
Yeah, I think the big problem we're solving is engagement. I think that people want to maintain their engagement levels. They want to grow their engagement level with their fans. And with one way to do that, a big way, is to actually have a one-on-one discussion with clients, have the opportunity, but also be able to monetize that effectively in a safe way. We talked to a number of influencers who say, this is great because I don't want to give away my phone number or my Skype ID or what have you. They want to do it in a controlled environment. It's very easy, make it very simple, and it helps them earn income to support their work. Or influencers who don't need the money, we're finding, there may be millions of followers, or they're earning income from large sponsorships. We're finding that those people are interested because they want to stay relevant. They may want to donate to charity. So we're finding that charity is becoming a really interesting sort of desired feature of this potential marketplace. So I think it's a pretty big problem in terms of for influencers, but it's also a problem for buyers and fans, because you can see if you read comments incessantly, like my wife does, she finds that people want to connect, that they want attention, that they send a comment and they never get, it falls on deaf ears. So for the buyer, this is an opportunity to kind of get a fast pass, if you will, potentially to an influencer, to get a one-on-one attention. We're looking at other ways, not just one-on-one video chats, but multiple, N-on-N, one-on-N chats, but also chat, being able to maybe pay for a chat to actually communicate directly with somebody. If you have questions, if you're talking to a make money person, for example, how do I start this business? How do I earn money selling, what have you? You can contact this person. It's very difficult to contact these people. So it kind of flows into our new motto, which we call reach the unreachable, a new way to reach people. So I hope that's a big enough solution, problem.
Well, this is the fun part about being an entrepreneur. You're about to find out, or you are finding out, because if you do solve a big enough problem, you're going to get traction, and that's the reality. And then it's the hard work of getting that attention, getting noticed in a big, very noisy world. And I think, and the other challenge, some other challenge along the way too, is that, especially in social media, maybe we can chat a little bit about that too, is what excited me about social media years ago was when it came out, it was the Wild West. There was the number of algorithms that were imposed were minimal. People could see your tweets, they could see your Facebook posts, and then the platforms wanted to monetize by making you pay to play. And in about 2013, when Facebook went public, the organic reach plummeted, and it goes across all social media platforms now. So how do you see that? And also, we might chat a little bit more about the other parasocial media. So you've got a lot of influencers that got organic reach, but must be surely some influencers now starting to see a drop in organic reach and then hence drop in engagement. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
And the drop in engagement?
Yeah.
I'm noticing that too. I think it's a challenge because I think engagement is directly related to how much they can charge, for sponsorships and brand deals. So it's important in that respect. And it's also important for growth, right? So, if you can knock up your, inch up your engagement percentage by a point, that's dramatic, So I think for us, it's a little too early to tell, but I think what we're hoping for is, and I think expecting, is that by being available to speak with people, I think that should improve engagement. We're going to be looking at that pretty carefully on data, looking at the data over time. It'd be interesting. Unfortunately, I can't prove that right now, but I think that it's a hunch. that we're gonna look into.
Right. So have you launched yet, or are you still in beta, like you're running it in small groups? Where are you up to with your entrepreneurial journey on this?
Yeah, it's currently beta right now. It's an early version. It's kind of like a prototype, but it works, and people can join and bid and create slots to talk. We're looking to add auctions fairly soon, which will be really exciting, I think, which will help people find that value, the right price that people are willing to pay. I think interesting, we're looking at other competitors in the space. There's this company called Cameo, which has been around for a few years, and they're starting to dabble with something similar to this. But people, it's interesting, we're finding that some celebrities are dumbfounded. They don't know what to charge. They don't know if it's too much, it's too little. And I think what's interesting about our approach is that an auction will help find that price,
Mm-hmm.
in a much more, expedited way.
Right.
Yeah.
The other area you mentioned was reach the unreachable as your tagline, and so getting in touch. So what are some of your solutions around that problem?
I think we're looking at it in two ways right now, and this could change. We're such a young company, but we're looking at it in terms of booking time. If you're an influencer, booking time that you're available,
Mm-hmm.
but also being available for impromptu phone calls. And what's kind of interesting is, and we're prototyping this, is where people can become available for direct contact for a price. So for example, if you're an influencer, Jeff, and so you could install the app, and you could set a price, say, I don't want to be called unless my minimum price is met.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a way to kind of cut down on that noise, but also let people through,
Mm-hmm.
who are very serious about reaching you. And you can change that. It can be dynamic and so forth. I think it's pretty exciting. I think if we can create this new system of communication, it's certainly not maybe as viral potentially as the free, there's so many free live streams, but this is one-on-one. And I think this could also be useful on the professional side too. For example, where people are inundated with potential interest. I have, it's interesting, I'll tell you my quick story about my lead investor in Wildeye. He got so excited about this. He mentioned that he had actually done something similar. He had spent, I think, $2,000 to reach a CEO on LinkedIn. He offered to pay him $2,000 just off the cuff because he wanted to learn about the company before making an investment. And so he felt that that was an interesting way to try to get his attention, and it worked. That was a very fortuitous thing for both of us because he understood the concept instantly.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Because, and the other, I find it a conundrum, not a conundrum, but is the difference between a B2C influencer and a B2B influencer. And a B2B influencer is typically more a subject expert. So how do you see that playing out on your platform? And how do you see the landscape with B2B influencers versus B2C? I'm sure you've done some research and done some observation.
B2B, you mean business experts for businesses?
Yeah. So it could be a marketing expert, it could be a HR expert, it could be, I don't know, AI expert, but
right.
So
HR,
because
right.
because a lot of them are built much better what I call, I suppose, deep content rather than just entertaining content. So and you see it too, even with podcasts, you see someone that just goes and does funny interviews and it's entertainment versus someone, and this podcast, the show is
Right.
more about educating, inspiring people in their entrepreneurial journey. So how do you see the difference between those two, and be interested in your observations?
That's a really good point. I think I think the B2B kind of blurs with B2C a bit in this sense, because people who work for companies are consumers themselves, right? So I haven't really thought enough about B2B per se, but it is a massive opportunity because you do have these influencers. You have motivational speakers, for example. You have coaches, people with expertise, HR. Technical expertise, and these people can have influence. They can have thousands to millions of followers. And, typically when you get to be that influential, you're going to have an agent, and it can be very difficult. You can reach them, but it can be difficult to really break through even through an agent. So, and I've tried with some people I've wanted to connect with, been blocked by agents. So it can be frustrating. So I think this can give people an opportunity to directly reach some of these business minded influencers for direct help, either personally or for a team, or even just propose, speaking at an event. I think it's a new way to reach people directly, and I don't know if the agents will allow this to happen, but I think this could take off in that regard. But again, I think it's a little early for us to know.
Yeah. Well, we're all humans. I think Brian Kramer, a friend of mine, has one of his catch cries is "It's human to human," and I totally agree with him on that. But um, it's entertainment, which is the entertaining part of being an influencer, and it's fun. People, turn on Netflix typically not to be educated, but to be entertained. People read a blog post typically not to be entertained necessarily, but still it's got to be good writing or good video. So but I'll be really interested to see how your journey unfolds with the platform in terms of that. What have been some of your biggest challenges as an entrepreneur with this? Is it funding? Is it ideas? Is it discovering the problem? What are some of the biggest challenges you're finding?
Yeah, well, a lot of challenges. I think we're good on the funding. It could be, I'd like to see greater funding, but we've done very well. I think the biggest challenge may be personal for me. The other may be in terms of sort of fears, dealing with fear. I think it's an important thing to deal with that we all have. And I've been dealing with fears most of my life, like getting beyond fear of failure, fear of success, fear of people saying, "I told you so," people, fearing that you might be wrong, fearing that you've missed the window in terms of timing the market. So for me, dealing with fear has been a really big challenge. And I'm finding ways to deal with it. Another is just reaching influencers. I think we're starting to. We've engaged a really good influencer marketing firm to help us reach out to initial set, and we're using an interesting new database technology that we're going to be using to reach influencers. So we're really looking forward. We're just on the cusp of this right now, and but I think the challenge is to jumpstart something. That's always a challenge, to make sure that the technology is desirable and in demand. So we're seeing that. We're just about to hit that plateau right now of the traction that everyone's looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the big challenge.
So do you think so one of the biggest challenges of entrepreneurs is not, so it's funding could be a challenge, solving big problems is a challenge. It can be also timing. In fact, I think I watched a TED talk recently in that 40% of success by far was dictated by right timing in the market. How do you feel about timing for your product?
I think we're spot on. Mm-hmm. I mean, who knows, right? But I think given COVID, I think given this issue where we need connection, I think the explosion in social media, the great interest in sharing knowledge and entertainment, I think we're at sort of at the forefront. I think I think the timing is pretty good. I think time will tell, but you're right. I think you're right. I think timing is one of the biggest factors for success in any business.
Yeah. And I've experienced myself personally, both professionally as well as in entrepreneurs, that timing's everything. I changed my career from being a high school teacher to being in the technology space. And guess what? I chose to get into the PC industry, and it was 1984.
Yeah.
And guess what? That's when Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were starting to duke it out, and we started to get a lot of traction. And I've rode a few waves since then. And for me too, when starting the blog in 2009, for me was all about timing. It was the Wild West, and social media was discussed at the dinner table, going, what's the point of social media? It's just a waste of time. That's often the discussion where it started at. And what do you do with social media? I was asked. So, but it was just an observation for me and a passionate interest that kick-started me out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask you a question, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
That's fine.
where do you see social media going from here?
I think that the challenge, and we've experienced it both from elections, we've seen digital advertising, we've seen fake news, we've seen that social media can be used for good or for evil. I think the reality is, and I remember going to a World Youth Forum 2 years ago in Egypt, and there was a roundtable hosted by the president of Egypt, and it was about the good aspects of social media versus the bad aspects of it. And I walked into social media very excited, very passionate about it, and saw it as being very much a force for good. But I suppose after that World Youth Forum event, I had my rose glasses taken off a little bit, and any technology can be used for good or for evil. It really doesn't matter whether it's dynamite or whether it's nuclear energy. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
I think that we're certainly, the organic is getting harder from a social media point of view. I think it's the pay to play, the industrial complex. I think the other challenge I'm experiencing, and a lot of other people are, is the algorithms being put in place to try and control at scale the bad actors taking over the platforms. The machine is, I just wrote a blog article today called Human versus Machine, that the imperfect algorithms on the machine are getting in the way of even the good actors getting their content amplified through a Google or a Facebook ad.
Right.
So I think now we're going to see, I think governments intervening, trying to make sense of it. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in Australia, with the platforms becoming so large and powerful, they're almost like their own countries. You're also seeing the battle, I think, between man and machine, and also, or human and machine, to be politically correct. But I think as humans, we've got to take a much more active role rather than just rolling over and letting the platforms just make more money. And I think that we need to intervene in a positive, proactive way, I think, as humans, to make sure that the platforms don't have so much power that they will just run over the people that still need a voice heard, and make sure that the right messages, that we've got to look after humanity. And any technology platform, I think if it gets too large, then we can become slaves to it. I think that's the big challenge.
Totally agree with you. It's a scary time for social media, and you're seeing censorship, which is just unbelievable today in this day and age. And it's just so easy to do if you're a big tech company.
Yeah.
I don't know how it affects really the average influencer, but if you're in the political space, it certainly is something where you need to be concerned. And you're seeing people being deplatformed, and it's pretty bad. We really, humanity needs the freedom of ideas, and you just can't. And what's really encouraging, though, you're starting to see other platforms appear, like Rumble and Parlay and others. I think that's the way you pronounce it, Parler or Parlay.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
So
they're a Twitter clone, I suppose, for free voice versus a censored voice, I think. Yeah.
Correct. They're young, they're kind of immature, but I think people are just going crazy with this now, flocking over to these now. It seems like it's taken forever, but you continue to see privacy, violations from Facebook and censorship. I mean, it's so irritating. When I send articles or videos in, let's say, Messenger, and I'm censored because of the potential content. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I hope we can get past this.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, and also there's a paradox with freedom as well. It's the freedom to have free speech. Then there's but then that should be with a responsibility, not being a bad actor that is going to tear someone down abusively, a bully. So is that paradox with freedom? And I think there's a responsibility with freedom that also needs to be acknowledged. And how do you get an algorithm to determine that?
That's the question. I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah. Well, look, we battle constantly with Google and video, Google ads and video and Facebook ads, because they go sensitive issues is one of the generic terms they roll across our, the other one
Right.
I heard recently was copyright issues. So we just did an ad recently, copyright issues. I'm promoting my own platform, my own podcast. I'm going, copyright issue.
Right. We had the same problem, Jeff. Yeah. In fact, we're getting feedback where they stop the ad because they say you're not being inclusive. Like what? Excuse me?
I haven't heard that one yet.
I'll have to send that to you if you're interested later. But it's like, are you sure that this ad is reaching out to a plurality of different people? And it was like we were doing basically a bid to talk ads with influencers that that have come on board, and so the AI thought it was a grocery, like a position for working at a grocery store. So like, A, it's wrong, but B, it stopped our ad campaign. So it's pretty bad what's going on.
Yeah, so I see a whole range of issues popping their head up, from platforms being too powerful to the platforms, algorithms getting in the way of the good actors and the people that really are making a difference. And guess what? The bad actors have got a lot of money and can work out how to get around at any rate, you see. So there's a real tension, and I don't know how it's going to be resolved, but I think we're in the middle of the transition and evolution of human versus machine, where the machines are taking over more, but in a very imperfect way. And I think this journey is going to go on for a few years to resolve, those sort of issues.
Right. I think it's incumbent upon us to walk away from these platforms if they control us too much, or if they censor too much. I think people are starting to realize it, but it may take a lot longer than we think. And there are people who don't even know or care about what's going on. So anyway, so, and it's a different generation too. The Gen Z is less interested in privacy. So
yeah, well, I've taken some fairly proactive actions in terms of how I interact with the platforms, from going quite dark on some of my platforms, because I'm going, do people really need to know about this? Like we all do like a little bit of attention. The other thing too, that with the intersection of both the mobile phone, we all got publishing machines in our pocket, and we can share photos instantly from Instagram, no matter where you are. I turn off, I've got no alerts on for any of my platforms. Zero, nada, zilch. I want to control my time. I can be tempted enough to go into my phone any rate. So, and I am quite careful about just diving into the Facebook stream, because I think we leap in, and as a quote a friend of mine shared with me about 2 years ago, that we judge our insides by the outside of others. And when you leap into a Facebook stream, it all looks like happy nirvana. It's not, as we know, because the best face is put forward, the best voice. And I think that the effect, I can feel the effect on me. I'm going, these people are doing so well, and I'm not anywhere near that. And you get to a point where you're going, you start doubting yourself. I think these are some of the small effects, because we're in the middle of a huge social experiment, and we don't know what the effects of this platform and technology is with us as humans. And I lost a partner to suicide 2 years ago, not because of social media, but mental health is something I take to heart very, very carefully now, or take it on, because mental health issues, I think, are on the rise. COVID's even highlighted because of lack of human connection as well. So it's this incredible balancing act, how we use the technology to serve us as humans, not be its slaves. And there's a lot more learning to come, I think.
I agree. I think I also fear that there's a lot of self-censorship going on. In fact, I see it all over the place, where people don't want the algorithms to, detect what they're saying, so they'll make up a term like the coof. People say coof, for example, if they talk about COVID or something.
Yep.
Other acronyms or what have you. So it's this détente I'm starting to see occur, where you've got AI versus human,
Yep.
right? Trying to avoid being detected in the public, right? In the airwaves, or online.
Yep.
So it's a very strange experiment, as you said.
Yeah, and that's what prompted me to write my latest blog post, Human versus Machine, because I don't have the answer. I just highlighted what the problem is, and we've got to solve it.
I think you could write a book on this subject. It's a big subject, an important subject. So yeah.
And I think we're in the middle of that transition, and it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that what we're trying to do here is just add more humanity to the social media, take people out of their comments and texts and DMs and get them talking to each other face to face, even if it's not that much money, just something, even for free.
Yeah. Well, I think if you can give, good voice to the influencers that want to make a difference and connect them with the right people that want their voice to be heard and can amplify their voice, I think you're heading in a great direction. And I wish you all the best with the platform, the tech, and the market. And I look forward to hearing more about it. And so thanks very much, Ted, for spending the time with us from Montana. And look forward to catching up in real life one day.
That would be great.
And I hopefully get to America. I don't know when, but sometime, hopefully in the near future. Thanks, Ted, for your time. It's been great.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Tulsa. Take care.